morning. Thanks for joining this session, NHS Project Futures Festival 22. I'm Julie Atkins. I'm Principal Relationship Manager at NHS Digital and a passionate business change advocate. Just before I hand over to Carole OSTERWEIL, I'd like to let you know a little bit about the format of this virtual event. You'll see on the right of the screen a panel detailing chat and Q&A. The chat's obvious. The Q&A is for you to put questions to Carole as you think of them, if you'd like to. A game code will have been given on the screen at the beginning of this session for arriving on time. Thank you. You can write this down in the notes tab on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll also see a game code at the end of the session. And in fact, what you'll also find is that Carole has donated, if you can see that, copies of her book as one of the prizes. So keep those game codes noted. Carole's session is very interactive, so prepare to get involved. You'll need a piece of paper and something to write with. And towards the end of Carole's session, there'll be a Q&A. So please add your questions to the Q&A as the presentation progresses. Now, I'd like to introduce Carole OSTERWEIL, a project troubleshooter and coach who's on a mission to bring an understanding of how the human brain works to the world of project management and business transformation. She's also an author and spoke to the NHS Project Futures Festival last year about key ideas from her book, one I've just showed you, Project Delivery, Uncertainty and Neuroscience. Its subtitle, A Leader's Guide to Walking in Fog, tells you she understands what life is like in the NHS. Her newest book, Neuroscience for Project Success, Why People Behave as They Do, will be published by APM in the spring. Carole's pioneering approach is informed by over 20 years as an educator and consultant, her experience as a project leader and her training in psychotherapy and the arts. She works with corporates through Visible Dynamics and coaches on the government's Project Leadership Programme at Cranfield University. Carole.
Hi there, and it's lovely to be here, so thank you. It's delightful. It was delightful last year, and I'm so chuffed to be invited back. So thank you, Joe, and everyone in the NHS Project Futures team. And the title of my session is How to Get Traction in COVID Chaos. And I feel over the last couple of weeks, maybe I should add, plus all the extra chaos that may be affecting some of us as we're wondering what's going on in Ukraine at the minute as well. And my subtitle, Get Out of Your Head, and you'll find out more about what that means as we go through the session. Let me just give you a brief outline of what I've got in mind there. Firstly, it's a real sneak preview, and I'm so delighted to have the cover of my book, Neuroscience for Project Success. You see, it's moving all the time. So you're getting a sneak preview of that. As Julie said, that's due out in June. But I'm going to kick off with some brain basics, why we behave as we do. Now, I'm guessing, and I'm hoping actually, that some of you were here last year. So for you, it might be a bit of a refresher. And for those who are new, well, I've decided to cover the same ground because it gives us all a common language. So it's a kind of refresh, an opportunity to learn. And then we'll be moving on to think about COVID chaos. What's that impact been on all of us? And then I'll be finishing with giving you some tools for gaining more traction. So that's what I have in mind. And it'll be fun. Bear with me. So I'm going to start off by waving my hands around. And this is to introduce you to a model of the brain, which is called the brain in the palm of your hand. Now, it's not mine. It comes from a chap. Sounds very disrespectful, doesn't it? A chap called Dan Siegel in the States. And Dan is very, very well known. And he's one of the first people to have been involved in actually coming up with a universal definition of the human mind. And of course, this is a great simplification. And at the same time, I think it gives us just enough detail to be able to begin to picture what's going on for ourselves and talk to others about it. So I really want to encourage you to follow along. There is no point in taking notes. If you follow along and move your hands as I move mine, you will know everything you need to know by the end of the next 5 or 10 minutes. So Dan says it's really useful to think of your brain as having 3 parts. I want you to do just what I'm doing, wave your palm around and look at it. Yeah, and then take the fingers of your other hand. And in this model, the idea is to think of the brain as having 3 parts. Now, the first part, just trace around your palm with the fingers of your other hand. The first part is your brain stem. And your brain stem connects through your central nervous system, which is kind of starting at the wrist, and bring your finger down, trace right down to the cup of your elbow. through your central nervous system, through all your major organs, right through to the tips of your fingers and the tips of your toes. And at its most simple, your brainstem controls all of your body processes, how fast your heart beats, how deep or shallowly you breathe, your temperature, just everything that's required to keep you alive. The second part of your brain in this model is your feeling brain. Take your thumb now and wrap it over the front of your palm. Trace from the root of your thumb to your thumbnail. So this is essentially your feeling brain or your limbic system. Now, you can't cut your brain up and find your feeling brain or limbic system, but nevertheless, it's a useful metaphor. And essentially, this is your emotional command center. It's where aspects of memory reside, and it's also where your behaviors and impulses originate. Now, take the fingers of that hand and wrap them right over the top, nice and tight, and trace from the back knuckles through to the front knuckles. And I do want you to trace right down to your fingernails, and then you'll see you come into contact with your palm again. This is the third part of your brain, your thinking brain. And essentially, it's where all of your logical analysis happens and rational decision making. And it's also the site of higher human functions like empathy and moral judgments. You see how all three parts connect as a single system right down into your body. That's one integrated system. And its number one function, and when I discovered this, it really surprised me. It shows you how early I gave up biology. Its number one function is to ensure your survival. And in order to do that, it's constantly taking in information. And it takes in information from two sources. This is happening below your level of consciousness. It's taking in the information and it's weighing it up. It's weighing it up and going, from what's happening in my body, has my heart rate gone up? Have I suddenly flushed hot? Have I got that twinge in my stomach? And we don't think of ourselves as taking this information. What's that telling me? Is it safe or is it dangerous or hostile? And it's also taking in information, again, constantly, without us noticing, through your five senses. So what you see, what you hear, what you touch, taste, and smell. Your five senses. And it's going based on my Carole's past experience, or you, Julie's past experience, or Chris's or Joe's or whoever's, because it's all very individual and we've all had very different past experiences. Is it safe or is it hostile? And if it detects that there might be some sniff of danger in the air, it will begin to divert energy away from your thinking brain so that your body is ready to take avoidance actions should it need to. Now, we all know if a car was to come speeding towards us, our thinking brain will go straight offline. Our thinking brain will go completely offline. We go onto autopilot and we do whatever we need to do to get out of the way and to survive. So we're very familiar with that as an idea. So essentially what I'm talking to you about is your fight-flight response. But I think it's important that we learn that it's more nuanced than that. Our fight-flight response is not only geared to be looking for physical threat, it's also constantly sniffing out the environment we're in and thinking, compared to other times I've been in meetings with this particular person, is it safe or is it hostile? So it's looking also for signs of what we call social threat. Will I still be a member of this group if I say what's on my mind at this moment? What will happen to my status? Will I lose all sense of control? All those kinds of things are sources of social threat. And if we sniff them out, it doesn't mean we always go completely offline, depending on how to what extent we assess it's dangerous. Our thinking brain will go offline to different degrees. So waggle your fingers and just get a feel for that. Now, essentially, it's our body through a process of neuroception which picks up the sense of threat first. And we're not really aware of our physical responses, but as I said, your heart rate might go up, your breath might get a bit shallower. And it's these physical responses, physiological responses, that we begin to label as our emotions. So if you think about it, you could say, yeah, okay, I want to avoid this, it's feeling rather dangerous, and that will evoke what would be known as an avoidance response. It's diverting energy, but also actually we're having an emotional response at that point. And the emotions, the big five emotional responses are things like fear, or feeling perhaps a bit ashamed of what's going on, feeling disgusted by what they've just said to me, feeling maybe sad or maybe angry. And we're not aware, as I said, of this happening. Knowledge of it does not reach our thinking, our cognitive brain, until several milliseconds later. But our behaviors begin. And the avoidance behaviors, the big ones, you might see or might happen to yourself. You might go on the defensive a bit. You might want to withdraw from the situation, or you might want to go on the attack. Start talking really fast, quite aggressively, or maybe get your fists going and say, I hope that doesn't happen at work. So what I'm describing here, as I said, is your avoidance response. But that's not the only part of the story. Equally, we might sniff out that it's perfectly safe, in which case our thinking brain stays completely online. And instead of evoking an avoidance response, what's evoked is an approach response. And with this, the kind of emotions that come with that are the sense of, oh, I don't know, feeling really excited. I'm really excited I'm able to speak to you today. Feeling joyful. We've just reached that project milestone. Feeling well supported, trusted, and taken care of by your colleagues. All of those things approach emotions, and accompanying them, when those are evoked in us, we're able to do all the things we're meant to do at work all of the time. So we're able to collaborate really well because we're not distracted thinking, what have I got to do to survive here? We can learn really well, and we can be really creative. So there you have it, the brain in the palm of your hand, with the three parts of the brain and a sense of what happens when we evoke that fight-flight response. And I know I've covered an awful lot, and I've covered it very fast. So I'm going to bring up another slide, this one here, which really is intended just to summarize that. So you can see the thinking brain in blue. You can see what happens when our thinking brain is taken offline, the kind of emotions that is evoked, that are evoked there, and the kind of behaviors that follow. Equally, over there on the left, if our thinking brain stays online, the kind of emotions which are evoked, which allow the kind of behaviors that we want on projects, the creativity, collaboration, feeling really motivated and inspired, and able to learn. And what I want to do now is just to give you a moment to digest it. So I'm just asking you this question. As you look at that slide, and perhaps move your hand around as well, what does this model start to explain for you? And if you were here last year, how has it helped you since we last met? And I'm going to give you 2-3 minutes to make some notes. I'm just going to sit here quietly. And when you're ready to use the chat. And later today, you might want to post your notes on the activity wall, but for now, I'm not worried about that. And I'm going to just, as I said, sit here quietly. And Julie, I'm going to leave it with you. So to monitor what's coming in, and maybe give people, as I say, good time just to reflect on it.
Thank you. Well, we've certainly had people working along with you, Carole, on that, because Paula Brennan posted, if anyone could see me doing this from my office, they'd think I've lost my mind. So she's obviously been doing the brain as you were talking about it. And lots of people looking forward to the session. So there's obviously lots of thinking going on.
That's good.
No comments as yet.
Okay, well, I don't want to put people under pressure because that can take their thinking brains offline. And what's important is that they have some time to digest.
And now Sarah Harris has said, "No, I know why I've been finding it hard to focus. I've been worrying so much about my children during COVID and now Ukraine. This will help me to be kinder to myself."
Lovely, yeah.
And Gail Malkin has said, "Great way to explain this, easy to understand. I have to say I've I've been aware of the different elements of the brain for many years, but I've never seen the brain in the hand before, and I found it really, really helpful as well. Francesca said offline brain and the associated response emotions are ones I'd associate a lot with, fight or flight. And Monica asks, is there a nature nurture aspect to whether you have a more thinking emotion based brain?
Oh, well, I can answer that one. And that is, I'm going to wave my hands around. If you imagine two people, yeah? Somebody is very agitated like this, it does evoke in us other people, agitation as well.
A mirroring response, isn't it?
Yeah, and so this it's not so much the nature nurture, but nurturing, living and with people who know how to nurture to bring a youngster's thinking brain back online really helps us develop the skill to regulate ourselves.
And that must surely help in a work environment as well, where you have someone who's agitated. If you respond by not being quite so agitated, that might help to bring them down as well.
And we'll talk more about that later.
So Jo said, I've used it to reflect on which part of me is reacting. And she said, it's helped me pause and reflect and take time out to get back in balance. I think that's really useful. I think we've no more comments at the moment, Carole.
Okay, so excuse the noise of my chair getting stuck. Okay, so let's move on and change gear then. COVID chaos, which will allow us to answer that question of how to get traction. These two little pictures I've drawn to capture two aspects which have been really striking to me. And they're both reflections over the last 2 years. And I'm imagining, I'm picturing, I know certainly many of the people that I work with and people that I coach, they're still very pertinent. So I'm kind of interested about how many of you really recognize that feeling and that big picture of that person working from home. You might have felt like this as you sat down at your computer screens again this morning, I'm not sure. But, oh, here we go again. And so there's something about energy levels being quite difficult to manage, and a sense of maybe overload as you switch on and your inbox is full and filling up during the day. Maybe you're dealing with other people. I spoke earlier about, there's lots of people being quite dysregulated around us. So maybe that also contributes to the here we go again. And I'd say for many of the people I'd work with, and I'm guessing it's the case for most of you, the recovery plans, or we've got the reorganisation, the NHSX and the NHSE and goodness knows which other organisations, the CCGs due to be changing and disbanded in April. Whoops, it's gone back to July now. All of this stuff is really contributing to a real sense of stress in the air. And when we're stressed, that automatically begins to take our thinking brains offline. And for many of us, actually, it means that we're constantly on the lookout for what might be going on. It's not that we're consciously on the lookout, but if you picture for yourself a bird in the garden who is trying to peck for worms and they have a sense that there's a cat around, there's something about being wired and it taking energy, as many of us are actually quite hypervigilant. Or maybe it's when you sit down in front of yet another Zoom or Teams meeting, and either there's all those tiles on the screen, either faces or just the camera images. Nobody wants to be showing their faces. And maybe one meeting melts into the next. And often I think I've come to my next project team meeting and there's a sense that I arrive at my desk because I haven't been moving around the building so much or going to so many different places. Now, I know some of you are obviously not working at home so much, but nevertheless, I think we go and sit in the same position in a room, even if there is a meeting there, and we kind of anticipating the outcome before the meeting's even started, based on what we experienced last time. So there's that general sense, I would say, of here we go again. And this other little image, the one down on the left-hand side there, came from a conversation when I was talking to many people about psychological safety, and a real sense, somebody referred to an article which had been written, I think, in the New Yorker magazine, which was saying there is now a condition which is kind of generally accepted of us generally languishing. It's not that we've died like the bowl of bowl of tulips at the end. We're not quite burnt out, but we're kind of like the ones in the middle. We're not up here feeling like this. And so for all of us, when we're in this environment, that question of how do we get traction, I think is a really important one. And to answer it, I want to tell you the story of one of the people that I was coaching, which is actually one of the stories in the book that's coming out in the spring. And this is a chap called Simon. Now, Simon works for a big infrastructure company. And I've done a lot of work with him about what happens when we're in this place, yeah, on the left-hand side. And he's a project director. And he was talking to me about how he's trying to get in this case, it was his program and project review board to really make sure that when they were making big decisions, major decisions, as he said, which impact lives and involve large sums of money, how do we make sure we're in the best possible mindset and that we're not arriving like this, thinking brains not online to start off with? And he told me he'd come to the conclusion, he'd been doing lots of research on it, and in the end, he had found a video of someone, a Paralympics athlete actually, who was a wheelchair user. And I can't remember what she did. I think she might have been an archer, but don't take my word for it. And she was talking about how can she compete in the best possible mindset. And for him, what he was saying, he said, she is used to being a wheelchair user. She might not like it, but she's used to it. We're still not used to this new world of COVID. And I'm saying, yeah, even though the government might have changed the rules, there's still the vestiges of that behind. So what is it that we can learn from her? And she would say, or she said in this video that he'd seen, if I want to be in my best possible mindset to compete, what it actually takes is me to be paying attention to not only how I'm thinking, but how I'm feeling physically. And I know that I get all these knots in my shoulders and in my neck. And if I want to be at my best in a competition, every 45 minutes, I have to pay attention to how I'm feeling physically. I have to spend 20 minutes actually stretching out those knots, thinking about how am I actually feeling and making sure I'm in the right frame of mind and body to be competing. So he took this to his program review board and he said to them, and if you just picture his program review board, now I'm being really rude, I've never met any of them. So I'm picturing, the men in suits. Yeah, either behind their camera images or actually online. The men in suits who are very serious and are kind of, even though they're there, they make me a bit stressed. So he said to the program review board, how are we going to be able to be in our best possible mindset? And he told the story of this athlete, and then he goes, okay, this is what I want us to be doing. I want us to be doing some desktop yoga. And so he began to roll his shoulders. But the way they got this board set up is whoever is presenting is also allowed to challenge the board. So he challenged them, all 12 or 15 of them, to actually make sure their cameras were on. And he took them through desktop yoga. Yeah, come on, get yourselves moving, he said. And they did. And I can see Julie's beginning to go. So I'm going to encourage all of you. I can't see you, but you can see each other. Get moving. And just notice what impact that has on yourselves and how you're feeling. And your ability, therefore, to focus on the job that's at hand. And then he went on to say, wind the clock forward 6 months. And this stuff has now become mainstream in my project and actually in our organization. And it's a pretty big organization. And it's become so mainstream that when our chief executive was doing his State of the Nation, now imagine this, like this, 500 plus people now, all on computer screens, he introduced the notion of desktop yoga, and they wheeled in a yoga instructor to be doing it with them, which I just thought was wonderful because I don't associate that kind of thing with infrastructure, which just shows about my prejudices and nothing else. But I thought I'd share Simon's story with you and leave you just thinking for a moment about what will it take to be in the best possible mindset to take the decisions on your projects that you need to take. I'll just leave that one with you a minute, and then I'm going to wheel on and talk about how do we take decisions. Now, this little picture here, the triple strand wish I could get my words out today. The triple strand of influences for decision making and risk assessment comes from some work by Ruth Murray Webster, who you're hearing from later, and Dave Hilson back in 2007. And their research says, there's three things that influence the way we assess risk and the decisions we make. And the things are these. There's a very rational assessment. Have I seen this before? And then there's stuff which is around, what are our automatic reactions? And our automatic reactions include things like our cognitive biases. You'll know from the world of projects, people always talk about things like optimism bias. Do we overestimate how quickly we can get this thing done? And do we do this in a positive way? Or actually, are we being a little bit more realistic here? And also our heuristics, our mental shortcuts, things like the availability heuristic. Something happens, we associate it with the most recent time something like that's happened before, and we assume that's going to happen again. And that informs the way we assess risks and the decisions that we make. And then there's another strand of the influence, which is, how do I feel about it? What's that evoked in me at a raw, visceral level? And it's that I'm really interested in, because that's the one that's getting the least airtime at the minute. In fact, I don't think it's beginning to get airtime, but we still really don't trust our gut reactions most of the time, I would say to you. But I don't want to put my prejudices on you, so I've got a little poll here. And my poll is this. So this is the question. When it comes to decision making, and when it's just you, which is the closest to your attitude, to your visceral responses? Number one, I'm not sure I have them. Number two, oh, I've got that knot in my stomach, my heart rate went up. I don't like having to do it. They kind of distract me and worry me, but I try to ignore them and push them out of the way and just stay with what I know is rational. Or you're closer to number three. I want to trust them, but I'm not sure how. Or maybe you're at number four. I treat them as important data sources. So I leave you with that poll. I'm guessing that the poll has gone up there. And that,
yep, the poll is up there.
You'll tell me as the answers start to come through.
Yeah, absolutely. So just while people are finding the poll and thinking and filling it in, there's been some really great comments in the chat. I asked who else was rolling their shoulders, and yeah, I am now, me too, me, haha. But also there's been some really meaningful kind of reflections on some of the things you've been talking about, particularly around things like the learning about how the brain works and using the sort of online brain to help deal with anxiety that when the offline brain is going a bit wild, and also people using it in different contexts as well. So Mike mentioned about trying it with the kids and how much they loved it, and it's some of that relationship stuff, and others have commented about that as well and said how much it's impacted on them to be able to use it within their relationship. So I think that there's some real learning that we can use, not just within the context of our work and our roles, but also, more widely in our relationships, which is really, really beneficial. Okay, so Chris, I think, has got the poll. So has everybody had a chance to fill that in yet? Shall we see what's coming through? Okay, just coming up now. So I can see those, and we've got about 50% have said, I want to trust them, but I don't know how. And that's quite a strong response there. And they distract me, but I annoy them, 21%. Yep. Treat them as important data sources, 25%.
Yeah, good, that's impressive.
Yeah, and that's going up very slightly, and people are still responding to it. We've also got about 3% saying not sure I have them, so perhaps not tuned in just yet, but there's a great opportunity to learn how to tune in here and be more conscious and mindful going forward. So that seems to be a pretty stable kind of situation there. So yeah, so about half the people saying I want to trust them, but I don't know how.
Okay, so that was, I'm going to move on then. Does that sound about, is you closing the poll? Okay.
I think that's a good reflection on the feelings here. So we're looking at 20%, they distract, worry, I try to ignore them. Just under 50%, I trust them, I want to trust them, don't know how, and then 27 treat them as important data sources.
Brilliant. Okay, so I'm going to move on to my next poll then. Poll number 2. When it comes to decision making, and this time I want you to think about when you're in a group of people who you are meeting for the first time. Yeah? You're in a group of people, you're meeting them for the first time. Now, what's the closest to your attitude to your visceral responses? And you'll see I've got 5 questions there. You'll recognize most of them. I'm not sure I have them as a 1. 2, they distract and worry me and I try to ignore them. Number 3, just as last time, I want to trust and talk about them, but I don't know how. And I've slid another one in. Number 4, I want to trust and talk about them, but it doesn't feel safe to do so. Yeah, I'm worried about what people will say if I talk about my gut responses here. And number 5, I just treat them as important data sources. So have a think and then please tell us what you think.
Okay, so we've got the first couple of responses in, and just while everybody else comes in, the first ones are supportive in terms of I want to trust and talk about them, but it doesn't feel safe to. So of those that have replied so far, 71%, but other responses started to come through now, so they're sort of balancing out a bit more. Nobody's yet put down that not sure I have them, so it might be that they're feeling a bit more confident from the last poll. So yeah, we've got answers on the board for each of the others so far, so still moving around, but actually that seems to be the dominant one. We've got 10% currently, they distract me, worry me, I try to ignore them. Just 5% saying I want to trust and talk about them, but I don't know how. And then treat them as important data sources, just under 10% there as well, but overwhelming 73%, 74%. I want to trust and talk about them, but it doesn't feel safe to.
Wow. Okay. So I'll leave you just reflect on what does that mean, especially if you're running meetings.
Absolutely.
And something else I do a lot of work on, it's not the subject of today's conversation, but this thing around psychological safety comes really important in there.
That's a really interesting point, and one that Health Education England is really working on at the moment. We have a new chief exec, well, she's been here over a year now, but she's very keen on creating psychological safety. She's a psychiatrist by background, children and young people's one, and she's brought some of that learning to the organisation to try and build a really positive culture. And it's incredible what an impact that has.
Wow. Okay. So can I move on?
I think that's it. That's pretty much settled, and we've got about 70% in that space. So,
wow. Okay. So that's when you're in a group of people when you're meeting them for the first time. Poll number 3. You're still in a group of people, but this time you know you work well with them and you feel supported by them. So what difference does that make?
That's interesting. Hopefully we'll see a real change here, because, you know, really good, creative, positive teams are really supportive, and you've got a real depth of trust.
Yeah. And a question I haven't asked in here, maybe I should have done, I realised, but I was just to mention it, I haven't asked, which is, I wonder whether there's people who actually don't have this experience of being in a group where they feel well and feel well supported. So I'll have to think about how to do that for the next presentation.
No, that's good. And people can maybe chat in the comments and saying, actually, you know, it's an area that they would like to see improved, maybe, to be diplomatic about it. So we've got a couple of responses through so far, and kind of what you'd hope to see perhaps, which is 73% so far saying treat them as important data sources. We've still got 25%, which is I want to trust and talk about them, but I don't know how. So I think that does reflect on maybe your question about actually, do people perhaps not experience that in some situations with their teams?
That's so interesting, isn't it? That complete movement then, when people are feeling that they're trusted and they're well supported, then 75% compared to the around 10% in the previous question. That's a huge difference. Wow.
Yeah, and that seems to be sticking pretty much. There's a tiny bit of movement, but those are the only two options that have been answered, which is I want to trust and talk about them, but I don't know how. And that's about 28% now, and treat them as important data sources, 72. So
okay,
sort of 30-70 split there.
Okay. Time to move on?
I think so. I think that's everybody in, and that seems to be fairly polarized in terms of that response. So clearly, you know, either experience one thing or another with that particular one.
Okay, so I want to give you some thoughts now, which is about the how to access them. And interestingly, I think it's interesting, it's all about, comes back to the subtitle of this talk, learning to get out of your head. Which sounds very dictatorial. Carole says, get out, I must get out of my head. This thing about, when I talk about people staying in their head, it's like we're replaying scenarios. Did I say this? I said that. Maybe I should have said this, that, or the other. Or we're looking forward. Dare I say this? How will they respond? Am I going to be, can we anticipate that and think, if I say this and then respond like that, then what do we need to do? So there's an awful lot of cerebral work that's going on. And that's, yeah, that's okay. But I put it to us, when we're under pressure and in the kind of environments we've been in over the last 2 years and everything that's associated with COVID chaos, I suspect our heads are doing too much work. So we're in our, and I speak about myself as much as anyone else, learning to get out of my head and do less thinking has been really important. Now, all this thinking stuff is really using what I've called cognitive intelligence, our cognitive abilities. And we're well used in organizations to talking about emotional intelligence. And yeah, we might talk about needing to improve it, but at least we know it exists. And social intelligence, which is not only about how I as an individual feel, the emotional part, but also what's going on between different groups of other people. So those are very, very well established things to be speaking about in a project or organizational context. In doing the research for the book, and what I wanted to be bringing to the table is there is another form of intelligence which gets very, very little airtime. In fact, I'd say almost zero airtime. People don't really know it exists. And this is somatic intelligence. And somatic intelligence is about intelligence which comes from our physical sensations, how we are feeling in ourselves. And this flows from the brainstem up through the vagus nerve. And what's really interesting, I think, is I was certainly brought up to believe that most of the information would flow from my brain down into my body. But it turns out that's not the right way around. 80 to 90% of our information flows from the body through the somatic system, through the vagal system, to the brain. Don't you think that's interesting? And so me saying to you, get out of your head, when we think about that, what's actually happening, that it's all that information coming from our body up to our brain and our brain to be working with, is actually a very legitimate source. And it's what I want to really help you learn to get a bit more in touch with. So I'm going to now do an exercise with you, which is, I'm going to title Get Into Your Body. Yeah? And what I want to do here is to invite you to think back to last time you were a bit stressed. And the reason I'm saying a bit stressed is I don't want you to be finding the situation which took your thinking brain completely offline, because that will evoke stuff in you, and we've only got 20 minutes and I'm not working one-on-one with you. But I don't want it to be a noddy, it was so little that it's not worth talking about time of stress. So think back to last time you were a bit stressed. And I want you to picture your surroundings, where you were, who you were with. You might have been with them in person. you might have been with them virtually. It might have even been an email you got, or a phone call, or a Zoom or Teams call. Who else was there? And what was going on? And as you start to recall the situation, just begin to bring your intention to yourself internally. How are you feeling? What does thinking about that situation evoke in you? What kind of emotions are coming up for you? Huh? Is it a bit stressed? Are you really quite very anxious with it? Angry, annoyed? What's coming up for you? Huh? And there's no rights and no wrongs, no good or bad, no positive or negative. I just want you to notice what emotions come up for you. And then as you start to reflect on those, now bring your attention even more to your body. What physical sensations do you start to notice? No matter how subtle. Now, some of you will find this really easy, and others might absolutely not have a clue about what am I talking about. And again, I wouldn't be surprised either way, and there's no rights or wrongs. Just do the best that you can. So what do you notice? Where, for example, might there be slight changes in your heart rate? Or where do you notice a slight change in temperature? Some people might be flushing up at their kind of faces. Other people might have gone cold in their feet. There's no rights or no wrongs. What's happening to your breath? Where might there be any kind of tensions or changes anywhere in your limbs or in your torso? Other people might be feet going up and down on the floor, or just that slight knot in your stomach. There's no rights, there's no wrongs, as I said. But what I want you to do, though, is to be really, really curious about it. And if it feels safe for you, you might want to just experiment to see if you can amplify or exaggerate those feelings and sensations. For example, if you notice a tension in your jaw, when I was thinking about it, maybe you just want to clench your jaw a little bit more. Or maybe it's about my shoulders went tight, so maybe round them a little bit more. Do whatever you need to do to just pick up on those echoes, because we all have physical echoes of what's happened in the past, about what happened last time when you were stressed. And now I'm going to invite you to find your pen and paper and to make some notes for yourself. What was it like? I'm not going to ask you to share these publicly if you don't want to, but just allow yourself to actually notice, what was it like? What did you notice? Anything which might help you describe that in terms of physical sensations, in terms of feelings. It might be you come up with a metaphor and you want to go, oh, I was like your favorite cartoon character who lost his rag with someone, or I saw a red mist, or I don't know, a rabbit in the headlights, whatever it is. And what if it's any of those, what was that? What are those physical sensations that went with it? And I'm going to sit here again for 3 or so minutes, very quietly, and invite you, for whatever you feel you can, put in the chat.
Can I share, Carole, how
Yes.
the last time I was feeling stressed, which was about 10 minutes ago? So my screen went completely blank and my brain went completely offline, just for a couple of seconds, and I was clammy and my heart started racing and my jaw clenched, and then I realized that I could still hear you and the camera light was still on, so I just wrote something on a piece of paper that said, my machines died. And that then calmed me down, because I knew that I was able to communicate what the problem was and that the safety net was there, and that then allowed me to come back. But just thinking about that, it was very real, and I've just been able to relive it now, and I'm still quite clammy, even though it was only a few minutes ago.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, how the memories come back as soon as we think about it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
So we have memory of physical sensation and muscle memory as well. Those thoughts.
We've nothing we've nothing currently in the chat, but I'm assuming that maybe people haven't been able to get quite so easily into the last time.
Yeah, that's right. And there's another piece I want to say, there may be something in the chat. I wouldn't be surprised if nothing comes into the chat, because sometimes for the first time when people do this, it can be really shocking.
There is a bit of sharing going on, so it's just Joe back in. I've been monitoring, and they might need to refresh it, Julie, because sometimes the chat sticks. But a couple of people have mentioned things around how it feels. So we got Jocelyn saying that it sort of feels tension and fists clench and heart races. I said pretty much the same thing. And Kath says, she finds her shoulders up around her ears, so it's all sort of tightened up. And Kate made a good point. Sometimes I don't think you don't think you notice and the stress until afterwards. So Lynn's put heart racing, breathing heavy, feeling sick, hard to swallow, shoulders very tight. Yeah, that's really kind of strong physical response, isn't it? And Glenn's commented back saying, I definitely agree, sometimes it's easier to see in hindsight. So there's some good reflections and comments there. And yeah, Gemma's put heart racing, feel heat rushing to my face, breathing gets heavy. But it's interesting, the point about the not necessarily able to notice it until afterwards, and when you're not really able to deal with it at that moment in time, or perhaps be able to identify it. So Felicity's saying, can't take a deep breath. And as an asthmatic, I can relate to that one. Louisa's put panic, lack of control. Oh, okay. Put me on then if you want. Do you want to bring us both on?
It really is going well, isn't it?
Okay, so we've just lost Carole for the moment, so clearly the technical glitches are carrying on, but there's some really, really great comments in the chat. And what's really nice is everybody actually sharing it with each other. And I think there's a real testament to the trust and the openness that we've managed to create here, and that you're kind of connecting in with, and really appreciate you getting involved with that. Charlotte's just made a good point about lose concentration, then get angry with myself because I can't make myself focus. Oh, absolutely. You are not on your own there, Charlotte. I think we all can reflect on that one. And it does get frustrating because you just get caught up in the emotion of the moment, even though there's a part of you that thinks this is ridiculous. Why are we, getting there? And anybody who's in a relationship, will know that those things can escalate pretty quickly. And then you realize, how did we end up going there? So there are
also a few people that have said about lack of sleep. So it almost feels like that you have that stress during the day, and then it stays in your head, and then when you're trying to relax, that's when it comes back and it says, that thing that happened earlier on today, well, I'm going to nag you about it. And then you just can't sleep, and you're thinking, why on earth is this getting to me now? It's not even relevant right now.
Well, that's a really, really good point, and it's one thing I really used to struggle with. And I still have coping mechanisms for that today. So be interested, stick in the chat what your coping mechanism is for that internal churn and that voice that goes on and doesn't let you let go when you're trying to sleep. So for me, what there's a couple of things I had to learn to do because I'd be tortured by the mental churn and not being able to sleep. One thing was it's funny, bringing back to the whole shoulder rolling thing that Carole was doing. I do like a relaxation routine before I go to bed. 2 reasons. One, that it helps me to unwind all the muscles and to, you know, really stretch out before I go to bed. Because if I don't, I find myself, you know, tightened muscles are all kind of tense in the morning. So it helps, but it also helps me quieten my mind and relax my mind, and to help sort of just kind of, I suppose, decompress from the day by going through the physical motions of it. The other thing I do is I tend to listen to audiobooks, quite soothing, gentle ones, things that I'm not really bothered about actually listening to. And I find that hearing another voice stops my internal monologue from chattering away and allows my brain to switch off. So I don't know whether anybody else has a similar kind of thing. Julie, what are the comments in the chat? What are people saying?
So there aren't any comments about how they cope, apart from someone having 3 rescues out to relax, but I don't suppose that helps when you're trying to go to sleep. You can't really go have a brew and go into the garden and watch them for a while. Yeah. But certainly one of the things that I do and have done for years is I just write it down. It's just get it out of my head. And in fact, many years ago, I used to work for an organisation where we had an answer phone, all days of an answer phone, and I used to ring the answer phone and leave messages for myself for the next morning. And then I knew I knew I'd get it the next morning, so it was fine. I knew it would go.
That's a genius idea.
It just got it out of my head.
Yeah,
so someone else has said the same sort of thing. A pad and pen at the side of the bed. If it's something that's bothering me, I write it down. Then it's something I can look at the following day. Same approach. Now I think I would leave a message for myself on my mobile.
Yeah.
I like to do yoga or reading before bed, said Sophie.
That's another good one. Yes. Yeah. And part of that is about relaxing and allowing your brain to just kind of slow down and shift focus, isn't it? I think yoga is fantastic for that.
Yeah. Someone said, I think about the ocean and the sound of it.
Yes. Yes. Another good one. Yeah.
Put the thoughts onto a cloud or a football in my mind, then kick them over the fence in my mind. Oh, I like that one.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
I boot them out one by one. They still exist, but they're over the fence, and I'll revisit them tomorrow. I see I'd forget to revisit them, so I'd have to write them down, then put them on the football and kick them out. That would be great.
Okay, yeah.
Gemma said I'd put on a TV or have a book to read to distract the stress out of my brain. Craig said acknowledge it and identify it's meaningful or meaningless and let it go in that football. Lynn said I did a sleep course recently which advised if you remunerate whilst trying to sleep and say the word this pushes the thoughts back. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Gail also listens to audiobooks. And Glenn said, mental churn, that's a great phrase. Try to take a step back and remind myself that it's done. I can't change it. What could have been different? What could I have learned? Yeah, you see, that's where the what could have been different? What should I have learned? That's where that stuff goes on in my head, and now I've got to get it out. I'll write it down or whatever I'd need to do.
Yeah.
And then someone said, listen to guided meditations with affirmation and certain frequency waves for sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so
timing for Carole back.
Yeah, so we've got Carole back, which is fantastic. But Carole, there's been some really fantastic chats, which we'll share with you afterwards. But people have been reflecting on how they have dealt with stress and challenges and issues, and we've shared some really good ideas and comments. So really fantastic.
Okay, I'm sorry I got switched off. It looks like the power went for a minute, so I had to reboot in. So hello everyone, and I'm going to make a quick apology because my screen layout is now completely different and the big one I was relying on is conked out. So I might be doing a bit of fiddling, but if you can bear with me while I have a fiddle.
Yeah, to get your slides back up and ready to share. We will keep sharing some of the comments in the chat because there's been some really fantastic.
Yeah, while you're doing that, Carole, someone's suggested insighttimer.com is a free app and much better than Headspace. Lots of meditations and live talks and yoga. So that could be great. And Glenn said having a dedicated workspace at home helps him to close the door and walk away, which I must admit that I'm very lucky. I've got the office and I close the door and it doesn't get opened again. But I then have to leave messages for myself on my phone, so I get them the next morning.
But Charlotte and I have been commenting on the joys of chicken therapy. We've both got pet chickens. And how lovely that is. And so, you know, and it all sort of comes together in terms of getting out of your headspace, getting into the physical space, and having ways of being able to break that sort of internal mental churn, isn't it?
Indeed. Cool. Right. Sorry, I've just got to this. Not doing what I want. Okay. So let me try this one.
Yes, that works.
Okay. So I'm going to put it. If I'm not speaking to people looking at you in the face, this is because all my screens are switched around. But let's go. And we're still aiming to finish at 15:15. We might lose some of our questions then, I think. All right, just so people are aware of that. Okay, so, and this is really helpful for me. So my slide, I was talking about what techniques getting into your body and taking mindful moments. And I have heard some of the chat from the chat. So it may be that what I'm about to do is going to repeat some of the stuff you've done or you've discussed, or put a bit more detail on it, but I hope people will bear with me. And certainly, Julie, it's ironic, isn't it? You were talking about how your thing went down and whoops, mine then went too, which is unheard of. But anyway, so getting into our body, taking a mindful moment. The first thing I'm going to invite everyone to do is to stand up. So this is a fine way to get out of your head. You can watch me do it. Up. And whoever was worried about what the office next door would think of them before, try this one now. As I do it, have a good shake, and then a stretch, and then just slow it all down. And allow yourself, plant your feet very firmly on the floor. Just allow yourself to notice what is happening in your body. And maybe just shut your eyes for a moment. Bring your attention right down to your feet now. And just notice the contact points. So I'm guessing there'll be 3 of them, maybe not quite. See if you can get your weight balanced quite evenly over both feet. And just notice the contact points under your big toe and your little toe and under your heel. And you might have to sway slightly just to get that even balance. And maybe now just relax your knees a little bit and see what difference that makes. And for those of you that notice yourselves getting tense, in that exercise when I was asking about last time you were stressed, see if you can let some of that tension go. And another really good trick is then just to waggle your middle toe if you can find it, because you can't be in your head when you're trying to find your middle toe to waggle it. Waggle your fingers. So that's one technique which I would describe as taking a mindful moment, getting out of your head. I heard you reading from the chat, and other techniques can be things like using your breath and just noticing how that moves through the body. So you might just want to notice that for a minute. Where do you notice your breath? Some people will notice it as they breathe in and breathe out. They'll notice it. Slight change of temperature as it goes in and out of their nose. Other people might notice it at this level. And others still at the level of your stomach. There's no right or wrong place. Just be curious about it. Just allowing yourself 10, 20, 30 seconds, a minute if you can take it, or even longer to use your breath can be great. And then I'm going to introduce you to one other exercise, which is an absolute favorite of mine. I'm going to turn my back on the camera possibly. And this is called a name 3 things exercise. So I just want you to look wherever you are in your room. The idea is here that you find 3 different surfaces. So I'm going to turn around. You see there's a window here. You find something that's just a different surface for you. Put your hand on whatever it is and allow yourself to just notice what it feels like. So my window is hard, it's shiny, and it's cold. And you notice the surface you've touched, name the object, and just describe it quietly to yourself. And then go and find another surface. So I'm going to touch my trousers and notice what they feel like. You can find whatever you want. And again, just describe how it feels to yourself. And then find another surface with a different tactile quality again. So for me, it's a piece of wood. And then when you've done that, and there's no need to rush it, just come back to your notepad and make some notes now about how you're feeling now. What was it like? What do you notice about your physical sensations? Sorry, I'm going backwards and forwards. This is because my screen's not working. And again, use the chat. And I'm just going to switch off my slide view a minute while you're doing that, and I'll leave you to facilitate the questions, and then I'll be back in a second. I'm still here. I just want to see if I can improve the layout.
Thanks, Carole. Jo's mentioned this idea of wiggling your middle toe. That was really spectacular. That was fabulous to do. My heart rate has calmed down, definitely. And Jo said it's feeling much more relaxed. Heart slowed and muscle feel more relaxed.
Right. Catching up with it. Okay. So the reason I've given you that exercise is because I want you to have something to contrast. Yeah, that makes sense? A real contrast of the difference. When your thinking brain is offline and when it's more online. Now, I'm not saying that in such a short time with a mindful moment, it will be completely online, but it will be different to how it was to a different degree. And so there is some stuff about noticing how you feel can be really, really useful. So rather than pushing it away, notice how you do it, and then think about what do I need to do to bring my thinking brain more online. And those mindful moments are lots of little techniques that you can use. Yeah? And that is really me giving you an example of, as I said, getting your thinking brain online. And those of you that were with me last year, I introduced this idea of a mindful awareness muscle. So bringing your attention internally. And I often talk about it as being like a muscle, about being mindful and being aware of what's happening inside. And I love this quote, so I'm going to use it again this year. Using your mindful awareness muscle means that you have a direct intuitive knowing of what you're doing whilst you're doing it. Yeah? You know what's going on inside your mind and body and what's going on in the outside world as well. So there's a real inside out quality to it. And this quote comes from Mark Williams at Oxford University. And he talks also about when we're being mindful, and he contrasts it. So when our thinking brains are online, we've got this direct intuitive knowing. And when they're offline, we don't have it. And he observes that most of the time our attention is not where we intend it to be. It's hijacked by our thoughts and emotions, our concerns, our worries for the future, and our regrets and memories of the past. And all of this stuff interferes with our ability to be present about what's going on. And also it has an impact on the quality of our decision making. So I'm a real advocate for helping people discover they have got this mindful awareness muscle, and then to begin to build it. And in that exercise of getting out of your head, 2 different ways of doing it, I'm hoping I've helped you link it up and go, oh, that's where it is, that's where it might be, and that it's worth paying attention to. Okay. And the benefits of doing this, I hear you getting a picture, a before and after picture. This comes from the new book. I've sent it off to an illustrator. I don't know what it's going to look like when it comes back, but this is what they were given. And I hope that helps kind of summarize why it's worth paying attention to.
Carole, I don't think that the participants can see your screen at the moment. I know we can in the background, but it's not coming into the live. Oh, they can now. Yeah.
Okay, go on. Ooh, no, share again. Sorry.
Oh, they can see it now.
Lovely. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Okay, so that's the benefit of it. And now, oh, sorry, is we moving on a slide? Great. So I'm really interested because I know some of you, and I've heard it from the chat whilst that you were summarizing while I was completely literally offline. Yeah, some of you know how to do this, some of you less so, but I'm really curious about, and I put up this poll, number 4, when it comes to purposefully getting out of your head during the working day, which of these applies to you? And I put an asterisk there, purposefully, because that means your intention is to quieten your thinking brain and get it online, rather than just have a break. All right, and the four choices then: it's never occurred to me to try, or I've not known how to. Number 2, I try to, but it rarely happens. Number 3, I manage to several times a day or a week. And number 4, yeah, I'm pretty successful of doing this all the time.
So results are starting to come in. There's a couple in there so far. Don't know if you can see that, Julie, but we've got sort of one of each. There's a couple of people, I try to, but it rarely happens. I manage to several times a week. And a couple of people saying it's never occurred to me to try, I've not known how. So this is a really great introductory session for people that haven't been exposed to this before. So that's fantastic. And we've got somebody who's clearly quite experienced at this. So I'm pretty successful at doing this. So it's, yeah, I think there's clearly opportunities to develop it as we see the sort of the results come in. There's clearly opportunities to improve on how we can do this on a regular basis to make it more consistent. So I've tried to, but it rarely happens is now about nearly 50%. And it's nearly 30%. It's never occurred to me to try. I've not known how. So yeah, lots of opportunity there.
Great. Okay. I'm going to ask you to close the poll, Joe, because I'm conscious of the time running out after my inadvertent break. So if you would, I'll move on to the next slide. So what I want to do now is to really put it all together and summarize into some tips for getting traction. And the very first thing I want to say to you is, and I found this term a really useful one, you have a body budget. This is the work of Lisa Feldman Barrett. And she says, you know, just like a project has a budget where you make deposits and you take money out, your body has a budget too. Yeah, and just responding to everything that's going on all of the time is obviously making withdrawals, attending those. And it's really important that you make investments too. This tells us it's important to make frequently. So if you find yourself saving up for a run at the end of the week, I want to say don't save them up. Get into the habit of mindful moments and doing other things which will help bring your thinking brain back online. And there's a whole raft of things you can do. Stand up and do the kind of shaking exercise that we did. Go and get a glass of water. Stroke your chickens or your pets. Have a conversation with the dog. You know, loads of different things we can do, but do them frequently and do them during the working day because it's in service of better productivity and decision making. And equally, mix activities up. If you find something's really draining, think about how you can do the things which you find easier. So if you're one of these people that prefers to be talking to people, how can you mix that up with spending hours on a spreadsheet, mixing it up so that you're investing more often in yourself? And then the next tranche of things, maximizing, as I said, the value from the effort you put in. You really want your thinking brain to be online. And it's not realistic to expect it to be there 100% of the time. You need to, and you'll know this, but I want to say, I hope I've given you a reason to actually fight for it now. Time between meetings. And if you need to, say, I'll be there 5 minutes late because I want to be fully here when I arrive. If you're running meetings, the value of a check-in at the start, taking the time to go around the room and ask people, how are they feeling? What's front of mind today? Might take 5 or 10 minutes, but it's a way of helping them get their thinking brains online. And then the value you get and the work you do will be so much more focused. Another great tip is to make time for meetings with yourself in your calendars and diaries. Don't call it that, you'll have to come up with a cleverer name. But we need to meet ourselves sometimes. And if you're one of those people who is chased, for example, by the never-ending inbox, time for meeting yourself. And rather than responding to each item that's in it, sitting there and going, okay, what's the pattern of these 15 emails which have come, so that you can address them at a higher level and get close to the root causes. That can be really helpful. So lots of stuff around mindful moments, getting out of your head to be strategic, thinking about what you're noticing in yourself, but also in the things you're being asked to do. What are the patterns there? What can you do to address those? And a superb question to ask yourself if you really have no time. In fact, I say, do it the less time you have. Use this question more. And I prefer it to what's my priority today? Ask yourself, where do I feel most exposed? Take a few moments to bring your thinking brain online and then ask that question. And it will tell you the answer of what you need to be attending to. And my last tip is check out your hunches with others. Because sometimes, so when coming back to those polls about I'm not sure I dare, one of the things to say is I have a really uncomfortable feeling about this. I wonder if I am the only person. That can be a really helpful way of putting what you're feeling on the table without exposing yourself too much, and also about making it okay for other people to talk about what their gut feels are. Okay, so so tips for traction, we've got a lot of it. And Jo, I've got a question for you, because I'm catching sight of the clock and I'm conscious that because the internet fell over, we've lost some time. And so I'm wondering about how to wrap the session up. And we have a couple of choices from my mind. My original plan was to be asking people what's been helpful or insightful for themselves, their teams and their projects. And then what are they going to do to take things forward? But we're practically at 15:15 now, and I don't know if we've got time to do that.
I think we can ask people to do that in the chat. So get them to do that in the chat whilst Julie can ask you maybe the most popular question. We can get one question out, we can maybe send you the other questions, and we can then bring the answers back and share them with people afterwards, if that's okay with you, Carole.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'm going to stop the screen share then.
That's fine.
Okay.
So Carole, I think there are a couple of questions that have come through that are around a theme really, and that's, so one of them is around how you do mindful activities in teams, and also what's the best way to do this when you're in a meeting or around others without looking weird or distracting them, especially when you can't turn off your camera. And that comes back into as well, what if you had 2 top things you wish everyone would do every day or every week, what would they be? So if you can combine those 2 top things, but within a team. Not putting you on the spot or anything.
Oh, no, I'm trying to be mindful here. Oh, sorry, and I'm shaking the camera as I do so. Trying to be mindful. Okay. Well, firstly, let's come back to this question of what to do when you're in a team. I do know some people who sit with their hands like this under the table. Like, how online or offline is my thinking brain? What do I need to do to bring it more online? And they find it, all the science tells us, when we ask ourselves how we're feeling, it automatically begins to bring our thinking brain back online. Yeah? So just asking yourself how you're thinking will help you do that. If you can, you don't have to bring attention to yourself. If you just notice how you're feeling, and maybe wiggle your toes, move your feet around to get them nice and steady on the floor, wiggle your toes. And then the other bit that science is really good is the breath is really powerful. Bring your attention to your breath, breathe in, and particularly the out breath. Notice it, how it feels and moves through your body. And that's, yeah.
And you can do that on camera, because nobody, as long as you're muted, they can't hear the heavy breathing, but they can see you becoming more relaxed.
And the other thing is, it helps other people. So sometimes also that thing I said to you about just now, I notice I'm feeling uncomfortable here. I wonder if anyone else is. Or maybe, and I've certainly been in meetings when you feel you could cut the atmosphere with a knife and everyone's pretending that's not the case. And sometimes the most powerful intervention is to say, again, maybe I'm crazy. I always say, put it out there. You don't have to, it's not like this is what's going on. Am I the only one that's thinking that it would be useful to take a break? We could cut the atmosphere with a knife. So that's another thing to do.
Is it me bit? Is it me that's feeling this, or is anyone else?
Yeah. So it's like, so giving people permission to put it on the table. So they're kind of more than 2 and less than 2. Are there other questions in there, or have I done what you've asked?
I think we're probably running out of time, Carole, but if you'd be happy to answer the other questions, thank you. And I'm sure that everybody will have lots of comments in the chat as well. So Carole, thank you very much. It's been a roller coaster of a journey, hasn't it, this one? But our brains have been online and offline a couple of times and coped with different levels of stress. But thank you very much. It's been a fabulous session.
No, it's my pleasure. We all could have designed it this way, but we didn't. To model it. There we go. Well, listen, it's been a pleasure. I look forward to people's questions, and I undertake to ask them as long as they're not too many individual ones. I might have to go thematic. All right.
Thank you.
Take care then. Bye-bye.
Bye all.